Well, one of the big things about a Human Rights Act is how it would get the balance between our politicians and our judges. And many people have said that judges would have too much power, they could override laws, we might go down the path of America. I actually don't think that's right. A Human Rights Act would give judges the ability to scrutinise the actions of our governments and parliaments, but under a Human Rights Act, Parliament would still have the final say. What it would do, though, is make sure that those actions are subject to checks and balances and that vulnerable people have their human rights respected. We need to get our expectations right about what a Human Rights Act could do. It's not a panacea, it wouldn't fix everything, it would just improve things and would give us new tools to protect the human rights of people otherwise who may be powerless. Even if we had a Human Rights Act, I think we should still be looking at constitutional change. For example, the Constitution still builds in racial discrimination that needs to be fixed. We also need to make sure we take account of the fact that many human rights can't even be best fixed by law. They need funding, they need support, they need leadership. So human rights is one piece of the jigsaw puzzle, an important piece, but by no means the whole solution. Well, prior to conviction, it's important everyone has their basic human rights, and they do include things like freedom of association and freedom of movement. It means that we should be entitled to associate with people freely, and we should be entitled to move around the country without undue restriction. But of course there are limits to every right, including those, and it does mean that if someone, for example, enters into a conspiracy for a criminal purpose, then that's the sort of association that is rightly prohibited. And if someone's found guilty of an offence and jailed, well, certainly they lose their freedom of movement while they're incarcerated. So we do have these rights, but they are understandably restricted where that's justified. Well, the High Court, I'd have to say, has a mixed record when it comes to protecting human rights. And that's in part because the High Court actually has relatively few tools to work with when it comes to that protection. Australia now is the only democratic nation in the world that does not have a Bill of Rights or a Human Rights Act at the national level. Our High Court, if you like, has got one arm tied behind its back while it tries to protect the interests of vulnerable people. And many human rights cases involve no human rights law at all. So when you ask about the record of the High Court, well, it's not that bad when you consider the limited tools it's got to work with, but it could certainly be much, much better if we had a legal system that properly protected the human rights of people in need.